Hey there, boys and girls. Welcome to your Edpuzzle homework tonight, dealing with decimals introduction. So we're going to start talking about a new topic tonight, which is decimals. We're going to go through it very slow so that we can understand what decimals are. All right, so our learning target for tonight is I can represent tenths and or hundredths as decimal fractions, and we're going to be using an area model to help us. So really what we're going to be focusing on tonight are what are decimals, and then what makes up a decimal number. For example, like your wholes, your tenths, and your hundredths. Okay, so before we really get to that, though, we got to really kind of understand what decimals are. And decimals, like fractions, are parts of a whole. Okay, so when you have decimals, you're going to have some extra things left over, like you would in like a mixed number or like you do in a fraction. So for example, here, when I look at my fraction that says 3/10, again, my numerator tells me that we have three parts. My denominator, which is a 10, tells me we need 10 parts to make the whole. So we do not have enough for a whole here. We've just got some extra parts or extra pieces. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's what decimals really are. They're those extra things we have. All right. With decimals, things we've probably already talked a lot about this year is that base 10 system of place value. So we know that we've got ones, tens, hundreds. What will come after the hundreds? Yeah, thousands and then 10,000s, 100,000s, and so on, right? And the cool thing about base 10 is we know that it always takes 10 of whatever we have before to make the next place. For example, it takes 10 ones to make 110. We know it takes 10 tens to make a 100. We know it would take 10 hundreds to make a 1,000. And that's the way base 10 works. It always takes you 10 of that thing before to make the next thing. And decimals are going to be the exact same way. Just to kind of refresh our memory there about place value, kind of like we just talked about, we know we've got the ones and the tens and the hundreds and thousands and so on and so on and so on. And if you remember, Mr. Wojo has told you when you're reading that number, it's important that you don't say the word and yet, because you're not separating things yet. But now that we're getting into decimals, now's when we're going to be able to start saying that word and we'll get to that part here in a second. Okay, one of the easiest ways to explain decimals is by using money. So for example, I've got this number right here that would say $4 and, because notice I've got to that decimal point, 32 cents. So if I'm looking at this, I know I have enough for $4 whole dollars, but then I've got 32 extra cents. I don't have enough for another dollar. That's just what's left over. So if I was trying to plug this number into my place value chart up here, I know that the 4 goes in the ones place because I have 4 ones. Now, here is that hidden part of your place value chart. Because like we said, it takes 10 of everything you have before to make the next place. So the way that decimal point sits in there, it separates your wholes from your extra pieces. Kind of like a mixed number would. You have wholes and extra parts. Same thing with a decimal. You've got your wholes, but then you've got your extra parts too. Now we call this place right behind the ones place the tenths place because it takes 10 tenths to make a whole. The place behind the tenths place is the hundreds place because it takes 10 hundredths to make a tenth, just like it did on this side. It's almost like there's a pattern here. If I look here, this says ones, tens, hundreds. Here I've got ones, and then I'm going tenths, hundredths. If I was going to follow that pattern, the next thing on this side would be thousands. So the next thing in my decimals place would be, yeah, very good. My next thing over there would be thousandths. Nice job. Now to kind of get a picture to help you understand what that would be, I'm going to take that same number we just had, 4 and 32 extra things, and kind of show you what that would look like with your pictures. So again, this is your ones place. You know you've got 4 whole ones, 4 complete squares colored in. Then we get to our decimal point. That's what separates your wholes from your extra parts. Because remember, this is your tenths place. Here you've got 3 extra tenths. And notice if you had 10 of them, you'd have enough to make a whole. And then you've got 2 extra little pieces, which would be hundredths, because again, if you had a full stack or a full column, if you had 10 hundredths, it would be the same thing as having a tenth. So what this number tells you here is 4 wholes and 32 hundredths. Now, if this 2 wasn't here, this would just say 4 and 3 tenths. We'll talk more about that later on as we get into our book and we get into this module. Today was just kind of getting your brain wet with the idea of decimals. Okay, so I'm going to put a couple problems in here at the end. Do your best on those. We'll go over those later on. Have a good night. Make smart choices.